I'm joined here with Meri. We're very excited to talk to you about hard and soft skills coaching and the difference between them. Maybe we should start with some quick intros to ourselves. Meri, do you want to lead off there?
Sure. Hi, I'm Meri Williams. I'm an experienced CTO, and I also chair and curate the Lead Dev Conference. I'm also an advisor to Kindred Capital.
Awesome. And my name's Hywel Carver. I've been leading tech teams and organizations for the last 10 years, and I'm currently CEO and founder at Hywel, where we do deep coaching and technical skills for tech teams. And we thought it would be an interesting conversation to have about some of the differences and similarities between hard and soft skills coaching. I did something about this in advance, actually, and one of the things that I thought was very different is that I think we very often think of soft skills as being innate and unchangeable. Now, I don't think that's true, to be clear, and I suspect you don't either, Meri. And we think of hard skills as things that have to be gained over time. Does that match what you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually wrote a blog post years ago called I Don't Believe in the Soft Skills Fairy, because people do pretend or act like they were tapped with a wand at birth and that gave them some innate set of soft skills, and it's utterly unchangeable. And as somebody who definitely didn't have many soft skills by default and had to learn them all very laboriously, I'm definitely a believer that you can develop those things. There's even research that shows that you can, whereas your IQ, your base intelligence level is fairly static, your EQ, your emotional intelligence, is definitely developable. And so I think there's even some good science that supports this, that these things are much more learnable than we like to believe.
Yeah, and I think me 15 years ago would have not believed that at all, and me now I 100% see that, because like you, I think I've tried really hard to improve my own soft skills. Often for me, it's been when I've been in contact with someone who I think has really strong soft skills in a way that I don't have, and the desire to sort of want to be able to emulate them and want to kind of learn what they can do, has kind of pushed me to get better at those soft skills. And I mean, I definitely think I have over that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that touches on one of the other things that's really different between them as forms of skills, is the way that we see them and the way that we can judge them. I guess we should at some point talk about what we really mean when we talk about hard and soft skills, but often hard skills are something that result in an artifact, something that exists and is left behind. Like, I think the obvious one here is going to be developing software. If you have different skill level at developing software, that will result in a different form of software that's the artifact, that's the outcome of that. Whereas soft skills are often transient. They happen in the moment, and then there may well be no artifact that's left behind that you can point to and say that was the result of the soft skill. There might be like memories, feelings, emotions that the people who were involved in that experience. I don't know. Do you have a good definition of hard versus soft skills? Because I definitely don't.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's about how they're measured. I think it's easier to measure a hard skill and say that somebody's at a particular level of performance with it, whereas I think a softer skill, the measurement is more fuzzy. Like, that's how I'd like to think about what the soft means. Is it's even just harder to articulate how good somebody is at it or not. There isn't a scale or a test that you can do that says, this person is 74% good at public speaking, or at coaching, or at doing one-to-ones, where you can say, this person's got a 75% score on a Python mastery test or something like that, right? But I think actually when we get into hard skills, we're not very good at objectively judging skills generally out in the world. I think we're sometimes lulled into a false sense of security with those arguably easier to measure things, that to think that we can measure them super objectively, but I don't think that we actually very often do. So in some ways, I think often soft skills are harder to learn as well, so it's a bit of a misnomer in terms of how it's described.
I think they both suffer from the idea that they can be opinion based, right? And I think I think it's possible for people to look at the idea of a soft skill and say, well, that's purely subjective, whether or not you were good at that. That person handled that situation really well. You think they handled it badly, but that's just a matter of opinion. And I think that happens with sort of skill on the soft skill side. And I think that happens with judgment on the technical skill, on the harder skill side. Like, I think you know that I talk about the idea of skills versus wisdom quite a lot, the idea of like the ability to do something versus the judgment of how you execute it. And typically with hard skills, we can say, yes, you can do this thing, you can code in this way, you can use that design pattern. And often the opinion comes not about whether you can do that, but whether you made the right decision of how to do it. And so I think the subjective side comes with wisdom and the application of skills on the hard skill side, where often it looks like the skill itself on the soft skill side.
Yeah.
But I suspect you and I would both agree that you actually can objectively have the soft skill or not. It's just not always clear.
Yeah, and I think it's something about the gradient by which you measure, right? So, is this person better at presenting than that person, or is this person better at one-to-ones than that person? I think that's harder to articulate, whereas we would generally expect at a certain level of seniority that someone's going to be better at some of the technical skills than somebody who's got less experience than them. I love that thing about judgment, though. I think I've heard you say before, knowledge is knowing that tomato is a fruit, but wisdom is not putting it in the fruit salad. And I that stuck with me as a really good example of of the difference between the two.
I've looked up to try and attribute that because I didn't come up with it. I've looked up, tried to find a source for it, and I still haven't. I found a couple of quotations that seem similar and might be original, but I'm not sure exactly where it came from. I think one of the things that's kind of interesting about hard skills is that sometimes you often know when you've done a good or a bad job. Not always, but you often can tell. You can be your own feedback system. And I think that might be something that people really struggle with soft skills, is knowing how to, when they've done something poorly or how to improve. And I'm not really sure why that is, honestly. I'm not sure if it's just because they're often, because of the lack of artifact.
And because it's felt to be so subjective, I think, as well. They don't know whether they've done better than the last time. It's difficult to judge your own performance. Whereas, as you say, when you're writing code, in an ideal world, you've got tests, and tests tell you whether you wrote the code correctly or not. Because if you didn't, they fail. There's a really interesting concept in in the literature generally, but where I found it was in Talent is Overrated, which is a book all about, the fact that actually talent isn't really a thing that exists. It's all just which skills we've been practicing and getting better at through our lives. And one of the key concepts in that is this concept of deliberate practice, which is a specific type of practice where you have to be, let's see if I can remember all of it, where you have to be kind of motivated to put effort into getting better and willing to expend that effort to improve. You have to be able to understand the task pretty quickly and easily, so it should build on what you already know. You should receive immediate informative feedback, and then you should repeat that task frequently enough that you can build and learn from it. And I think that definition of deliberate practice, which is basically the definition of the practice that results in the 10,000 hour rule and how people get to true world class expertise, is this very specific type of practice. And like you say, I think in school we have this separation between practicing and then performing. But in work, we're just in performance mode all the time. We're trying to do the thing. We're not trying to practice and then write a test, or practice and then play a match. We're in performance mode constantly. But actually, if you can design work in a way that it has those characteristics, it can be really, really powerful. And so something that I suggest to people when they're trying to improve at a softer skill is to think about where their feedback loop comes from. And sometimes all you need is to, if you're running a meeting and you're trying to get better at running meetings, all you need is to at the last 2 minutes of the meeting, ask everybody in the room to give it a score out of 10 and track that over time and see if you improve, or and say, I'm trying to improve at meetings. Can everybody quickly go around the room on the count of three, just with your fingers, show how, whether you thought this was a 4 or an 8 or a whatever. And then I'd welcome feedback afterwards, if anybody's got ideas on how to make these more effective. And sometimes that's all somebody needs, is that creation of the feedback loop that helps make the development of the skill less subjective and more about an actual improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think our model at Skill Well, our model for teaching hard skills is very much focused on that iteration. We talk about it, the sort of cycle of learning involving a new idea, which often you're introduced to passively, and then going and doing something with it constructively, and then hopefully getting feedback. And I think one of the things that we realized is that so much of learning is focused on, I'm just going to give all the passive things to you. And then the actual constructive, the sort of rubber hitting the road part of learning, where you go and try and do stuff, we're just going to wait till you're back at your desk doing your job. And actually, that's exactly what you said there, that like people spend all of their time at their job in the performing side of things and not on the kind of the ability to sort of practice the new stuff, which is why I think so much of that fails, and why it seems really innovative that we have like put those things together iteratively in a session.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that I feel most strongly about, I think, is the need to do. And one of the things I found with soft skills is that the doing often comes from being very, almost talking naively about a situation. Like you said at the end of a meeting, saying, I'm trying to improve at meetings. Please, can you give me a score and some feedback? Often the people I coach are very reluctant to say something like, I am trying to improve at meetings, in a way where I think they wouldn't say, I'm trying to improve at architecture, or I'm trying to improve at code performance. And I mean, do you think there's more sensitivity around people and their soft skills?
There absolutely is. One of the great insights. So Ruth Yarnett, who's the originator of Lead Dev, who runs the company that owns Lead Dev, when she first came up with the concept for the conference, she thought there was a gap in the market for technical leaders, and she went round doing proper market research. She's an amazing events person, and she went round with these mock-ups of what the agenda might look like, with real talks from real people. Not that she got them organized yet, just as an example for people to react to. And it was absolutely fascinating. One of the key insights from this research that she did, but that was also just so distressing to me to hear, because we started partnering on the conference very, very early on, was that everybody loved the example agendas that were fully about soft skills, that were fully about leadership and team and process and how to improve ways of working and all those kind of things. But they all said no to the crucial question at the end, which was, would you use some of your personal development budget on this, or would you ask your boss to send you? Because nobody wants to admit that they need help on soft skills, many times because they're in the leadership role already or the management role already, and they're presumed to have those skills. That's why they were promoted into that role. That's why they've been given the role. And so she found that when we had a much more even mix of technical topics and soft skills topics, people were coming for the soft skills, but the technical elements meant that they didn't have to have an embarrassing conversation where they admitted they needed help on soft skills. And it made me both sort of despair that we have an industry that's so ashamed of needing soft skills, and seems to, an industry that believes anybody can learn to code, but believes nobody can learn to coach. Like, that distresses me. I don't think we should be that industry. I think we should be an industry that values those softer skills and knows that they can be developed, and knows that they can be taught and they can be learned as well. But it's very much guided how we've approached Lead Dev over the years. So Lead Dev has 3 themes, which are team, tech, and tools, and we have an equal mix of those topics. And it's essential for the success of the conference, because if we were purely just the team topics, people wouldn't feel comfortable asking to attend the conference. They wouldn't feel comfortable getting the budget, which is, as I say, a little bit sad. We should be able to have a purely kind of leadership focused conference, but it's something that people need to feel like they're also getting some of the hard skills at the same time, which was a really interesting insight for us, and has, as I say, really shaped the last 8 years as we've run the conference, how we've approached it. But I think there really is this stigma around admitting that you need soft skills, and I think that's because of what you said earlier, that people assume that they're innate. So it's saying not just I can't do something, but it's saying I am not something. I am lesser in some way. I, as a person, am lacking, rather than going like, I haven't learnt it yet. And I haven't learnt it yet is a much easier thing to say. And in the tech world, I haven't learnt it yet about technology is very easy to say because tech's changing all the time, right? You don't know the latest front end framework? Well, fine. It was probably invented 4.5 minutes ago, right? It's fine to admit that you need a bit of help with whatever the latest React, Angular, Flutter, whatever is, right? Because they change so rapidly, nobody can be expected to keep up with all of it all the time. I think if you were admitting you didn't know what object-oriented programming was at this point, having been in the industry for a while, that would be quite difficult to admit to. Or that you don't have architecture skills. But even that, they're things that are expected with experience. So it's very contingent on what your experience level is that you do or don't have it. And I think that's also part of it. A lot of the path many of us take is an engineering path, and there's very little in the sort of entry level to mid level to senior engineer path that teaches you any of these soft skills, that you can get through all of those promotions without ever being good at any of the leadership or coaching or mentoring. But then when you get to senior, suddenly it matters a lot whether you can coach other people, mentor other people, whether you can lead a team, whether you can have, and then that's when architecture comes into play as well. It's when these technical strategy elements come into play too.
It made me think. You made me think of the Peter principle there at the end. The idea that people rise to the level of their own incompetence, and I suppose if we forgo those sort of softer skills, as a rule, then it hits people very hard when they suddenly get promoted to the level where those soft skills are key. And then I suspect there's a lot of imposter syndrome and a lot of really like people struggling to do jobs that they feel unprepared for and feel like are about them as a person if they're about a lack of soft skills. And super interesting what you were saying about leading with hard skills and kind of having to sort of slip in soft skills along the way. I think CTO Craft discovered something similar. I thought it was smart that Andy named it CTO Craft because it borrows the idea of craft, which we associate with building things and with hard skills. There's people talk about the software craftsmanship movement and things like that, right? The idea of crafting almost yourself is how I think of it. Crafting yourself as a CTO, I think, is a really good way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I also just think it's so interesting that we believe these things are innate when we as an industry really, really believe that people can learn almost everything. Because we all know, like, nobody wakes up in the morning able to code. You have to learn it by, and one of the great insights from Kathy Sierra, who's obviously an amazing practitioner in the field of learning. She's the inventor of the head first programming textbooks and that way of learning. But one of the key things she says is, with programming, the number one thing to reassure people is it's hard. And actually, that's the key to helping kids succeed at maths as well, is to reassure them that it is difficult, and they're not stupid for not getting it the first problem that they do. That it's an area of learning where you have to practice, you have to go through solving the problems in order to really deeply understand the principles. And so one of the things that she said that they did when they built the head first approach to teaching programming was they pretended every time you turned the page that page disappeared forever, it dissolved, because basically they were like, nobody ever actually flips back to an earlier chapter in a book to remind themselves if they didn't fully capture that concept the first time around. And so they were like, they pretended every time that you turned the page that the page would dissolve, and so if they needed to remind you of something, they had to actively remind you of it again. They had to tell it to you again, and that made this massive difference in how many people successfully learnt programming, was admitting it was hard and providing the information that was salient at every point that it was needed.
That's super interesting. And particularly you caught my, I don't know, reminded me of memories of my own with the comparison to teaching maths, because there was when I was at a period when I was trying to work out how I wanted to, what career I wanted, what I wanted to do with my life, I was supporting myself by tutoring maths. And I tutored both maths and chemistry at the same time for like A-level children, people applying to university. And it is remarkable how differently people think about maths to any other subject. Um,
Mm.
for example, one thing that you find is that adults will sort of say laughingly, "Oh, I don't know anything about maths," or "I'm really bad at maths,"
My
where they would
brain
never
just doesn't
say,
work that way, is something people say.
"Right,"
Yeah.
and they would never say, I'm really bad at English. I'm really bad at,
History.
I don't know, many other. Yeah, exactly. But I'm really bad at math is also almost a like badge of pride, or there's a sort of like it's sort of a club. I'm part of the club of people who are bad at maths. To the extent that I actually ended up writing a book for adults and like everyday maths, called Sodding Sums, which I didn't come up with the title, but I think it's a title that works. But it's very different teaching maths and chemistry, because one of the things that became so clear to me is that there's a massive confidence trick in the people who are good at maths. There were students I taught maths to who I would have to they would say, I don't know, I can't do maths, I'm really bad at this. And I'd say, well, what do you think it is? And you'd draw out of them that, they think the answer is 7. And you'd be like, that's right. You're like, you've got it. You've absolutely got it. Like you did know all along what to do. You've needed no help from me. You've absolutely crushed this. That's brilliant. Like, and then the next problem would come along, and nothing would have changed. Like that, or their confidence might slowly increase over time. But the fact that they had low confidence, they had this internal narrative of I am bad at maths, and therefore I can't do maths. And actually, they were often students who were doing fantastically and getting nearly everything right. And in chemistry, I never saw the same thing. In chemistry, there was just not the same. I don't know, people who were very low confidence and got lots of right answers, or indeed people who were very high confidence and got lots of wrong answers. People were maybe better at assessing their own abilities in chemistry, but it didn't feel like confidence played into it. And I think software development is more similar to maths because it's its own language. Yeah, sorry, you were about to talk.
And languages is another thing where people think that they're either good at it or they're not, and that's fascinating to me, because I think of maths and languages as the same thing. I speak 5 languages. I found maths very easy. The greatest gift my parents ever gave me, my dad's an engineer, mechanical engineer. My mum's an accountant. And so I'm from a working class background. I didn't necessarily have lots of advantages, but I absolutely had the advantage that I was not scared of numbers at all. I'm not scared of taking something apart. I'm not, and putting it back together. I'm not scared that if I take something apart, I'm going to break it forever. And I'm not scared of numbers. And actually, when I looked around, a lot of the women leaders I know in technology, the proportion of them who are engineers' daughters is really, really like surprisingly significant. And I don't think that's because there's any kind of genetic goodness at maths that comes with that. I think it's a lack of fear. I think that if you've got a parent, or if either of the parents, that if you have a parent who gives you time and gives you their support, who isn't scared of numbers, I think that's actually something that's immensely valuable. And it makes me, I've had a conversation actually with a number of parents that I know, where I just go, even if you think you're bad at this, genuinely one of the best things that ever happened to me was I was never scared of numbers. I didn't have any belief that I was going to be bad at maths or bad at science. And probably that confidence helped me, or that lack of confidence helped me keep going when things were hard. And because, I don't think there's even the most, gifted mathematicians do hit things that they don't understand. The difference between them, I actually know PhD supervisors in the maths department at the university I went to, they preferred to take students who'd gotten a 2-2, because a 2-2 meant you found it really hard, but you still worked really hard at it. You slogged away and you still got through. Because if you were really, really crap, you just got a third or you failed. But a lot of the people who got a first, they hadn't really struggled. and there were genuinely these because in maths to do a PhD in maths you're having to find a new branch. It's the key thing you have to do to get a PhD is to discover something to add to
Yeah.
the knowledge of the field. And somebody who's always gotten firsts, always gotten the answer right, doesn't cope very well with A, there not being a question, and B, there definitely not being a correct answer to the unknown question. And so I knew a number of these professors who didn't want to take the very high achieving academically students. They wanted to take the folks who'd found it a bit of a slog, because they were like, that grit is what's going to get you through a PhD. Expecting to always have the answer isn't gonna make for a good maths PhD. It was quite interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like the analogy with language in particular, because I'm one of those people that I have learnt languages in the past, but a long enough time ago that I have very low confidence in my ability to speak them. But if like I'm out of an evening and like have a couple of drinks, that is enough that the kind of the courage to speak. I'm never more fluent in a foreign language than when I'm like on a night out. Like, and you randomly bump into someone who's Italian, and like the month I spent in Siena comes back to me, and suddenly I believe that I'm fluent and brilliant at Italian, which I'm not. But I have that belief much more then than I do the rest of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also am the son of an engineer, actually. My parents are both engineers. And my mum, having been in a civil engineering background as a woman, meant that I've heard stories about some of the treatment of like women in those kind of technical professions from a young age. And I guess I wonder if this sort of comes back to our conversation, in that the different valuing of soft and hard skills has some history in gender politics, because I think traditionally, like, softer skills would be associated more with women and harder skills would be associated more with men. Again, traditionally, I don't believe that to be the case in any intrinsic way, but I think it's kind of part of the cultural background that we're in, that's the history of our industry.
And it's interesting because a lot of it's believed that a lot of the reason for that is because of danger. Because if you are physically, like, if it's true that on average women are physically less strong, which again I'm not completely sure of, and I used to be able to bench press 200 kilos, so I'm definitely not in that category. But like, you have to do more with your words to stop being in a dangerous position than if you can muscle your way through. And so a lot of women are much better at spotting problematic behavior and heading it off and trying to diffuse tension and trying to stop things escalating into violence, because they're worried about it, and that then translates into those softer skills in a meaningful way. But it's also very interesting, right? Because so much of this is there's such historical context to these things. Computer used to be a job title. It meant the person who does the calculations, and it was almost all women, and many of them were women of color. You watch Hidden Figures. It's an amazing movie. I'd highly recommend it to anybody who hasn't seen it, and that's about Katherine Johnson, who was, literally, one of the astronauts said, I want to know that she's done these calculations, because that's what tells me I'm going to come back alive. And if she says it's going to be okay, then I believe her. And it was amazing. And then we had this change when computing became a more lucrative profession, and when famously IBM, somebody decided that you must be antisocial to want to work with computers, and that became part of their hiring criteria, was loners, introverts, etc. And you can see in the stats the point when that idea really took hold and really started to change things. And we've had a steady decline in the proportion of women studying computer science since the year that IBM decided that, and it was just somebody in HR and IBM who was like, working with computers all day seems like a really shitty job to me. You must not want to have much human contact. You must be happy as a kind of introvert who doesn't want to have much contact with other people. And I think we're still paying for that misjudgment today. We still, if you look at the problems that we have as an industry, you look at the times when software goes horribly wrong, is delivered late, not meeting expectations, having cost twice as much as it should have done. Most of that isn't down to hard skills, right? Most of that's down to soft skills. Most of that's down to project management, coordination not going right, people not having honest conversations about estimates, lack of understanding of complexity, poor architecture. Like, these are not the base coding skills of whether somebody knows how to use a function correctly, or when to use matrix operations or whatever else, right? These are coordination and communication problems that cause the biggest problems in our industry.
Definitely. Do you see? Can you pinpoint as well when the idea of coding as a team sport became widely recognized? Like, I'm thinking of the book Peopleware is like maybe the oldest like reference that I'm kind of very conscious of. Like, at some point, I think we have as an industry realized that real world software projects are not the work of like 5 lone wolves in their separate bunkers.
Yeah.
Like, at what point did we start appreciating team skills and collaboration more?
So I think Peopleware is a seminal moment, but there are still people who need to be given Peopleware to read, and have never like come across it, and never accepted those things before, right? And actually, I remember, I was at university in the early 2000s, and there were still people on my computer science course who were complaining that we had to do group work because they thought that was unrealistic. They had gone to study computer science believing that they could work alone, and then they were being forced to do work in teams. Now, actually, I went to the University of Bath, which is, quite. They've just gotten University of the Year from the Times, and they're quite famous for having extraordinarily high employment rates post university. So they were actually correctly anticipating that we were going to have to do a lot of work in teams when we exited the degree, and so forcing us into more of that type of work when we were studying. But it's definitely not the case universally. I have a brother-in-law who went to Cambridge, and his his Cambridge education was very individually focused, and not focused on teamwork at all. And he had a pretty tough entry into the job market, because when he had to adjust to it being much more of a team sport than an individual sport, that was a tough period for him. I remember it being that way for him.
That's super interesting. So I went to Cambridge as well, but I was in the engineering department, and my degree was more on, it was called information engineering, but I suspect it would be called data science today.
Right, yeah.
And it was a very different approach in that we had teamwork at least every week. So every week there'd be some kind of like joint exercise, which would, because it was an engineering degree, sometimes you'd be like, I don't know, measuring the density of water through a turbine or something. But like it would be, that's a terrible example, because now people are going to point out that water's incompressible. We would do like hands-on labs in groups, and we had like team projects where we like built a robot as a team. That was a really good one. That like had to track lines, and 2 of us did the software, and 2 of us did the hardware, and 2 did the electronics. But yeah, it's so interesting that people are like taking such different approaches to learning the kind of core of computer science, with the aim of setting people out in industry, and actually sometimes preparing them well and sometimes preparing them incredibly poorly.
Yeah. I mean, I had an argument once with one of my old lecturers when I was on the sort of industry advisory board for the degree. And I went, you can't drop all database units. I can't expect to be hiring people as programmers or as engineers who haven't got any understanding of how to use databases. And he sort of quite snidely went to me, well, I'm trying to produce computer scientists, not coders. And I went, surely coders should be a subset rather than a superset of computer scientists. And he sort of grudgingly gave me the point. But yeah,
Oh, wow, yeah.
there are some of the academic approaches that just go too far, I suppose, into what's then useful for future research rather than for creating practical, pragmatic things out in the world. And I think that's another area where, to get back to our topic of hard and soft skills, I think the other thing that's tough about soft skills is that it's not always apparent what the benefit is. Like doing something
Mm.
really, really well from a soft skill point of view, there's an immediate benefit. But just doing it okay or doing it a little better than okay, it's harder to see that improvement. Whereas I think on things like coding, you see the tests going green. You notice that you're coding features faster than you used to be able to, and your sense of progress is much more significant because the only thing that
Mm.
judges you is the computer. Whereas I think with soft skills, you're a lot more judged by the people around you, by the interactions that you're having, and it's not a fully controllable environment as well. I think that's the other thing that's different about hard versus soft is
Yeah.
hard skills you can control everything in the environment, and then you've just got one factor that's different. If you're trying to get better at running meetings, did this meeting go badly because you're bad at running meetings, or because that one participant was on some weird stimulants today and they kept going off in random directions and it was really tough to keep them on point, right? Like the complexity of dealing with other people. And I think that's a fundamental almost difference in our industry. Like there are people who end up in management because they didn't because of the Peter principle, because they didn't see another
Mm.
route, or because they just hung around long enough that somebody thought that they should become a leader. Um, and then there are people who are like, computers aren't quite complicated enough for me. I'm going to focus on the people side, and I'm definitely in that category. Of on the one hand, when I first became a manager, there wasn't really another option. If I wanted to progress, I needed to. But also, I'd hit the point of being like, these computer problems are kind of solvable. Maybe it would be interesting to focus on something where it's actually a bit more difficult, and the immense variability of humans makes them much more challenging to work with than computers that, for better or worse, do exactly what you tell them to. Not exactly what you want them to do, but exactly what you tell them
Yes. Indeed. Yeah. I think you're totally right about the lack of reproducibility and therefore the richness of soft skills and the sort of fun of working with them. I find it fun is the kind of, people say they want their job to be, a lot of people say they want their job to be different every day. And I think that is often more true with soft skills than hard skills. Often you're solving different problems with hard skills, but the skills look the same. I wonder, you talked about the payoff in applying the skill well or poorly. And I wonder if the comparison would be like architecture. Because without, you can turn all the lights green in your test suite by copying and pasting the same code again and again, or by making your functions one massive case statement. If the input is letter lowercase a, output is uppercase a, because you didn't know the uppercase function existed or something. And I wonder if that is the thing that is the comparison with soft skills, where the quality becomes apparent on a much longer time horizon. And maybe the same is true with soft skills. The first day of the project, you don't realize that this person's excellent time management or excellent project management of it is going to be so significant. And then when a week before everything is due, they're only just telling you that it's going to be 5 months late. Suddenly you care a lot about their project management
Yeah.
and communication skills.
Absolutely. Tanya Riley did a great talk, and she's written about this as well. She says she just got a book out on being a very senior individual contributor that's worth looking up. But she did a great talk called Being Glue, which was all about these soft skills that are essential for getting software delivered, but are often undervalued. And it's being the glue between team members, between different teams, between
Mm.
different needs. It's a really worthwhile talk to watch. And her name's Tanya Riley, just to say it again. But I think it's another area where I think soft skills are underappreciated until their absence becomes catastrophic, whereas hard skills are appreciated because in their absence there is nothing. Whereas I think in the absence of soft skills, you can
Mm.
limp along for quite a while, but then the outcome is really not very good. And you're right, the feedback loop is a much longer feedback loop than you'll typically see for harder skills, for hard skills.
Mm. Yeah, I wonder if I think maybe hard wisdom and soft skills are equivalent in that way, because I think you've probably been in those kind of situations where someone says, "Oh, we've had this fantastic team working on this project," or sometimes even this fantastic individual, and then you take a look at it and you think, "Well, this person was like clearly good at delivering, but the way that they have delivered this is not sustainable. Like this, I don't know, copied and paste code, just spaghetti mess, no structure." And that's that kind of long time horizon where you're like, oh, I can see the future, and the future is we're shipping once every 6 months.
Mm.
And it's the same with the soft skills, where you sort of, in the short term, you might not notice those benefits, but over the long term, you can see whether someone's going to lead you up to the catastrophe or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think people are used to, with hard skills, getting feedback from kind of quite informal routes. People who like might be peers in the organization. It's kind of core to our model for learning, that there's a coach in each session to give you that feedback, but that's not like widely adopted everywhere yet. I think with soft skills, though, we tend to have typically more of a sort of formalized relationship. I'm not sure people give each other feedback about soft skills unless it's invited.
Yeah, so I think one of the things is to invite that feedback and to realize that even if it's on a different time scale, it can be really valuable to tell people, hey, I'm trying to get better at X. Can you, every time you see me do something along those lines, can you take a minute to let me know if I'm getting better or not? One of the great questions to ask is not just, give me feedback on my presentation skills, but or whatever other soft skill. I know I tend to pick presentation as a default, but it's one that so many people worry about. But a great question to ask is, how could I do this 10% better? Or how could I do this 20% better? Because that invites somebody to give you constructive, critical feedback, to tell you how to improve without having to, to feel like they have to, come up off their own back and give you feedback. And so one of the things that I encourage people to do is to actively think about feedback loops and how are you going to know whether you're getting better or not, and then enlist help. Ask, say to someone, I'm trying to get better at running meetings, I'm trying to get better at coaching, I'm trying to get better at mentoring, and then say, I'm going to try some different things. Can you let me know at the end of every mentoring session or coaching session or meeting that I run whether you think it's improving or not, whether you think the different things that I'm trying are worth continuing to do or not. And then I think the other thing for folks to realize is, because the timescales are different, you have to try things for longer in order to see if they really help.
Mm.
I think you can learn a new technical technique and then adopt it almost instantly if it works for you. Whereas I think with softer skills, you need to try more often, get feedback more often, and accept that there is variability. You don't have full control of all the context. And so sometimes, you might have done everything possible to chair that meeting beautifully, but some participants were being, all up in their own heads about a particular problem, and they wouldn't allow themselves to be brought back to the point come hell or high water.
Mm.
That's the kind of thing that sometimes you can't control everything, and so you have to roll with the punches to some extent.
Mm. Yeah, definitely that derailing is possible, and it comes back to what we were saying earlier, that the lack of reproducibility when you're applying your soft skills. And interestingly, I think with the technical skills, sometimes you'll learn something new and you can just do it, and sometimes you'll learn something new, and actually a core challenge then becomes how you bring the rest of the team with you on using that thing. Actually, we need to put more of the logic needs to go into the database because that's going to be more efficient, or we need to adopt this different design pattern and start rolling it out. Which I guess leads to my question of, I think it's easy in a technical career to think that you're going to go purely hard skills for progression, then at some point you're going to need to start learning soft skills, and that's going to be key to your progression. I don't think that's true. I think that even, junior, mid-level developers, I would want them to have stronger soft skills as they're getting higher in those kind of careers, whether or not they're eventually going to be a leader or a manager, or if their role is going to stay purely technical.
Yeah. I mean, I think also you can stay purely technical and still need to become a leader at a certain level of seniority. So I think we absolutely have to have routes for people not to become managers. Management shouldn't be the default. It should be a career change, not a progression. But I think if you get sufficiently senior as a technologist, you end up having to lead because you can't achieve all that much on your own. Like you said earlier, software is a team sport, and you're going to have to coordinate people some way or another. If you get to senior engineer at some point, which most people do aspire to do. And so I think I completely agree. I think that it's far better to learn these things along the way and to realize that even as an entry level engineer, you can mentor other engineers that are at the same level. Sometimes you're the best person to help because you've just learnt the thing. You're very actively thinking about how to do it right. And it's like someone who's just learnt to drive is spending a lot more energy correctly operating the car than somebody who's been driving for 20 years and probably doesn't even pay attention to what they're doing anymore. They're just on autopilot, right? And so I think it can be really valuable to learn those skills earlier, to invest in them earlier, because otherwise you hit a point where suddenly it's essential for your success and you're starting from nothing. And that's terrifying, right? You've spent 10 years building up all of the hard skills you've got, and then you've got to fix a 10-year gap in soft skills in like months. That's a really, really, really tough thing to go through, and I think that's what results in people going into leadership roles or management roles and really tanking at them, is that they didn't start soon enough, and they didn't invest early enough in some of those skills, and then they get overtaken. And they're distressed about being overtaken, but the reality is those other folks who are overtaking them, either by their own intuition or their own motivation, have invested earlier, or they've been assumed to be better at those skills, and so they've practiced them more. So it's the one way that some of the bias that assumes that women are better at soft skills, we do get to practice them more. It's one of the advantages that we've got. I don't think it's always an advantage when you're expected to always take the notes and always organize the team dinners and all of those kind of things. All the sort of emotional labor side of things isn't positive, and I'm not at all saying that should continue. But I think that it can have some positive side effects, that you get so much more practice at those softer skills over the course of a career. And I think it's a real mistake for people to neglect it completely.
I actually think it's one of the fantastic things about the boot camp model as well, is that what it's meant is that the industry now has far more people who have come from another career, another industry, and already developed a lot of soft skills which can transfer across. That while they might still be learning a lot on the technical side, they can be absolutely fantastic at things like time management, the kind of self-awareness that comes from having really good soft skills, like the elements of leadership as well. So I think it's become a really brilliant thing that we now have people who actually largely have the harder skills to learn and are already really good at soft skills because this is their second career and their relatively short time in software is kind of supplemented by really strong skills from elsewhere.
Yeah. One of the watch outs though for those folks, and I see it happen quite frequently, is because they're so over indexed in some ways on the soft skills, they sometimes get pushed into leadership and management roles too soon. And they don't end up with the technical strength that they will then need if they want to get to director of engineering or VP of engineering or whatever else. And so something that I think is really, really sensible and valuable is, if you're one of the engineers who's gotten to be quite senior without many of those soft skills, go find one of these career changers who's way, way stronger on the soft skills side and offer them a skills exchange. Offer them that you will help them get sufficiently technical, and they will help you fill this massive hole that you've got where you haven't invested enough in your soft skills. And you'll both benefit so much because they get to actually really level up to senior engineer level before they get pushed into doing more and more coordination work. And it can be an easy thing to it can feel like an easier route. It can be the path of least resistance to just lean into that strength on the soft skill side. But as I say, I think at a later level career wise, it can then limit people. And so some of the best kind of personal development journeys I've seen is where you have somebody who's got that soft skill strength and somebody who's got the technical strength really pair up and help each other. And that peer-to-peer coaching and mentoring can be so effective and so valuable. It's really wonderful to see.
It's actually something we've seen as well. We have customers now that have either developed their own boot camps or are drawing from boot camps, and it's one of the things that they use SkillOL for is it's basically bringing in those harder skills because people already have the soft skills. And I completely agree that we don't want to kind of push in the same way that people with hard skills can be pushed into leadership and management positions they're not ready for. People who already have very strong soft skills, we don't want to offer them the same failure mode. Yeah. That's not good for anyone.
Absolutely.
Meri, that's probably a good note for us to end our talk on. I mean, I've really enjoyed chatting to you about this, and I hope it's been useful for everyone else. And we'll be on Slack to answer questions in the AMA afterwards.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Hywel.